Alrighty. And you were listening last time, and you've been listening to this whole thing, so you know what the deal is. For the benefit of the people that are listening to this on YouTube, or who happen to pop in the minute and a half it takes me to do this, this is a AU set in the 1930s. It diverges from the canon timeline in that it is set on Earth, when in the 1900s the Alternians just kind of show up. And there is a reason for that, but it's never really explored so much in this series. And the Alternians integrate into society, and there's millions of them, and they change world history. World War I never happened. World War II never happened. The economic system is a little different. Yada, yada, yada. So this is set in Massachusetts, in and around Boston, in 1935. I don't remember what date it was. 35 or 37, sometime in the mid to late 1930s. And it's centered around June is being threatened by a weird, like, culty kind of organization. Vriska hires JaneRezi to come in and figure out what's going on. And it turns out there's a weird culty organization that's doing some weird shit. So we're really in the middle of it now. All of them have been... They got Rose because Rose is, like, involved in this family that was living in this weird village, and the village burned down and was rebuilt. And it's a whole lot. You should... If you're listening to this on YouTube, you should probably go back and watch the other 2 episodes, because a whole lot happens. And it's hard to sum it up. But suffice to say, lots of weird shit's been going on. And they're now all trapped in this village, being held by various people, including Cancri in this version, and some other people. So this is Past, Present, Past. Chapter 14, A Plan We Can Work With. Excuse me. Get some water before I start, because my throat's been a little rough today. Probably unconnected to the fact that I was spending like 3 hours talking to everyone on the chat this morning. I woke up again because the door had been opened. I'd been sleeping what felt like a while. It was Nepeta again, and she looked absolutely terrified. She walked up to me and knelt down.
I'm gonna take you to see your friend Vriska. If we see anyone, you're being taken to pee, and this doesn't happen. Please keep quiet and do exactly what I say.
I could see her shaking as she spoke. I nodded without saying a word. It was pitch dark outside, but Nepeta didn't seem to have trouble navigating. We took a different path than the first time out, looping back through the woods and around the pine buildings. After a few minutes, we broke away from the main path and went down a side trail to a single building made of the same pine boards as everything else in the village. It looked too small to have more than a single room, and the door was reinforced like all the other cell doors had been. Looking left and right furtively, Nepeta opened the latch. I noticed that it had no key or other means to prevent it from being unlocked by anyone who happened by. Faint yellow light came streaming out from inside, and I looked in to see a room very similar to my own, albeit with a simple wooden chair in the corner. In the chair, I could see Vriska sitting down and tapping her foot nervously. I stepped into the room ahead of Nepeta, and Vriska's face lit up.
Jane!
She sounded excited, but was keeping her voice as low as possible.
June's alive!
I nodded. Vriska looked down at her feet.
I didn't realize what we were walking into. I'm feeling pretty fucking useless right now.
Don't say that, I interrupted. None of us knew. There might be a couple hundred folks here, and they're all following that Cancri fella around.
Cancri told me about the whole thing with the circuits, with my family, I guess. I never really knew the rest of them. I was so little when everything went to shit, and I didn't know Aranya in any real way. I feel bad, though. I feel bad for what happened.
Do you know what's going on here? I asked. I mean, what's going on with the digging they're doing? Rose, she passed a letter when she said, where she said some spooky stuff about it. Vriska looked me right in the eye.
I can feel something out there. I don't know how to explain it, but It's like something is waking up.
I don't think Cankry knows what he's doing. Vriska shook her head.
No, that's what scares the shit out of me. I think he knows exactly what he's doing.
I felt a hand on my shoulder and turned to see Nepeta, her face wide with fear.
We have to go back. If it's too long, someone might find out.
I nodded and moved to get up. Vriska reached out first and grabbed my wrist.
Jane, please help her. Help June. I don't know what's going on, but I can't do this anymore.
At least you know she's alive, I said. I was back in my room as I was charitably thinking of the makeshift prison cell they'd put me in. Nepeta had taken me back without incident, and I was alone with my thoughts again. All in all, it was a bit of a mixed bag. I knew that everyone was alive, which was definitely a good thing, and we had someone on the inside who was willing to help us, which was also solidly in the category of things that were good. But balanced against that was the mysterious dig and the ominous feeling that Rose and Vriska were getting. I wasn't sure I wanted to know what that was about, but I was also pretty sure I wasn't going to be given a choice in the matter. Over at my JaneRezi wall again, I spoke. "JaneRezi, are you up?" "I'll wait, maybe half a minute." "Yes." "Vriska and Rose are definitely alive. June is being held in the big house with Cankry. We've got someone helping us." "Yes." "Do you think we can trust them?" This was a question I had no reason to think that Vriska could answer. Still, I wanted her opinion. No. Yeah, no kidding. I didn't think so either. "But we don't really have a choice, do we?" No. Without hesitation. She was right. What other choice did we have? No matter how frustrating, the nervous gal on the inside was the only chance we had to get in touch with anyone besides Cankry and his weird cult members. As much as I hated to admit it, we were basically stuck. "I'm going back to sleep. I love you." "Yes." It wasn't quite the sweet nothings I would have wished for, but given the circumstances, it meant the world to me. I put a hand up against the wall, thinking of the woman 20 feet away from me. This whole thing, not just the being held prisoner thing, but all of it, was making me very quickly hate everything in this world that wasn't JaneRezi Pyrope. And I missed her so much right now. Missed the feel of her smooth skin against mine. Missed the way she felt nestled in my arms. Missed a lot of stuff. I muttered to myself, "Oh God, when we get out of here, I'm really just gonna go to town on you, JaneRezi." Yes, she heard me. Because, of course, she heard me. I started blushing like a newlywed on the first night of our honeymoon, which is a normal response for someone who has had a normal amount of sex with their girlfriend of 3 years. The door opened with the usual amount of noise, but this time it was Cankry standing in the doorway, smiling in a way that I couldn't help but shudder at.
"It is a beautiful morning, Jane Crocker. Please come with me, for I have much to show you."
I knew I didn't have a choice, so I just straightened myself out and walked after him as he led the way. Out into the fresh air, out into the brilliant late morning sunlight. I was getting thrown off by the fact that the room I was being held in didn't let daylight in. My sense of time was completely messed up. It occurred to me that this was being done on purpose, as a way of breaking me down, or making me more susceptible to whatever Cankry had planned.
"I know that you have not necessarily come to understand our way of life here, but I believe there are things that you have to witness."
He was leading me down the path towards the big lodge.
"I believe that this will make you more receptive to our ideals."
As we passed the trolls and humans that were going about their daily business, they bowed their heads to Cankry in a display of respect, or submission, or fear. It was hard to tell, and was probably a mix of all three. The main lodge was almost stunning up close. It was at least 4 stories tall and looked so to be large enough to house well over 100 people within. The smell of cooking food was strong there. This was clearly the beating heart of the village. But we kept walking, around the edge of the lodge and into the woods beyond, towards the clearing I'd seen the other day, towards the dig.
"Truth be told, what I'm showing you here is not my discovery,"
Cankry continued, his tone light, almost playful.
"It was first found, the first part of it anyway, when this village was still home to the lawns and the circuits. It was, in many ways, the catalyst for everything bad that happened here. But I believe it will also be a catalyst for change.
And that, I realized, was a painfully loaded statement. Change was a neutral factor in and of itself, after all. Once we cleared the trees, I could see the extent of the dig. Trolls and humans were both involved, marking off large sections of earth into a grid using stakes and lengths of rope. Some of them were holding notebooks and marking things off. The rest were digging with picks and shovels. The excavation of many sections of the dirt was already well underway. I could see evidence of structures in various places, stone foundations that had to have been over 200 years old. Cankry stopped walking a few dozen yards from the dig site and swept a hand out across the field of turned earth.
This is the village of Dunwich, a cursed place, if ever one existed, founded in the 17th century by human settlers, destroyed by fire and madness sometime shortly after the American Revolutionary War, buried by the earth under circumstances that are lost to time now. But the Lalondes knew about Dunwich. They knew about the secrets that were buried here.
Cankry looked back at me, and his smile turned cold.
They wanted to make sure they stayed buried, that no one knew what was contained within this patch of earth. They would doom all of us in order to preserve some sense of order. In the end, they feared what they couldn't control themselves.
That sounded untrue, at least in part, but I kept my mouth shut about it. Instead, I found something I thought he'd take in a positive way. So, what is this thing that you found?
Oh, no, I haven't found it yet. Not all of it, anyway. Just enough to understand what I'm looking for.
Okay, so what is it you're looking for? Cankry smiled again.
Now that is the question, isn't it? It's hard to say exactly. I guess you could say I'm looking for the end of this world.
That wasn't what I expected to hear. I think my jaw was dropping more than a little bit. Cankry continued.
Specifically, a way to end this corrupted world and begin a new one. A world free of the evils and pains of this shell we call an existence.
That wasn't making me feel less uncomfortable about this whole situation. Why do you need us for any of this?
Truthfully, I don't think I do. Well, not you anyway, nor JaneRezi. I believe it is essential that I have Ms. Lalonde, Ms. Circuit, and Ms. Egbert. Those three are essential to my plans. The Lalonde and Circuit bloodlines are intimately tied to this place. I tried to involve running a circuit in this, but she turned out to be too weak-willed to withstand some of the stresses. My great hope is that her sister, I suppose you humans would say, will be more able.
Then why keep me and JaneRezi here at all? I wasn't sure if it was a good idea to ask this question, just in case the answer turned out to be a bullet to the brain. But what other options did I have at this point?
Yeah, probably your connection. Let me just see. No, there is like a scan line effect, but it should not all be blurry. That's probably your connection. Let me just look and see what it looks like on Twitch. No, it should be visible. Oh, okay, cool, awesome. There we go. That's fine. No, Twitch does weird shit sometimes. I'm not a huge fan.
You are both close to this, whether you want to be or not. You've had the dreams, have you not?
My breath caught in my chest. Cankry knew.
Of course you have. I would wager Ms. Pyro has as well. Maybe. It's hard to know for sure. This place calls to you. It binds you to it. Whether you know it or not, you have a role to play in the coming events.
He gestured all around.
All of this was foretold. I found the Book of Spurb, the mythological deity of the Creator. But no, this is no myth. This is reality. The book tells of dark truths, of things that live beyond our reckoning. The Lawns knew about them, yet they sought to limit them like small children, afraid of something they couldn't fully understand.
Every word of that sentence gave me chills, and I knew that I needed to let Rose know what was happening. Back in my cell, I was just going to be plain about it. Nepeta arrived with food that I supposed classed as dinner. Nepeta, can you pass a message to Rose if I write it out? I asked, cautiously. She nodded and produced a pencil from a pocket. I took the paper Rose had written her first note on and scribbled hastily on the back. Rose, there's something bad happening here. Cankry showed me their dig and said they're looking for something your kin knew about way back. The remains of a town called Dunwich and something about causing the end of the world. I don't know many details, but he talked about a book of Spurb and said it was all connected back to us. I finished the note quickly and passed it to Nepeta, who concealed it without me even seeing how. She left the room quickly and walked over to my JaneRezi spot to talk to her, and I walked over to my JaneRezi spot to talk to her, inasmuch as I could have a conversation in yeses and nos. JaneRezi? Yes. Right away. She was up. She probably heard Nepeta coming in. Can I ask you something kind of weird? Yes. Have you been having strange dreams about this village or about the end of the world? No response. A pause. Silence. Yes. But she hadn't told me about them when I confessed to her. She'd seemed very confused. The deduction wasn't hard. They started when we came here, didn't they? Another pause. Yes. The opposite of mine. Who knew why? It didn't matter anyway. Cankry's claim about us being bound to this place was ringing around in my head. I'm here, but I need to give some things some thought, I said. I love you, JaneRezi. I'll talk soon. Yes. My heart hurt. I sat down on my reed mat and put my head in my hands, and I started to cry. I'd put up so many walls and tried so hard to not let this get to me. Tried so hard to be strong for everyone that depended on me, or that I thought depended on me. It was so much, and I had such a hard time understanding what I was even supposed to do. So I lay down on the mat, still crying, and waited until I drifted off into unconsciousness again. I woke, but I was not awake. That much was obvious. I was standing in a deep fog, so intense that the ground blotted from view completely by the swirling gray mists. June was there, standing by herself, and suddenly I realized she could see me.
You're here. I know Vriska's safe. Nepeta told me.
I nodded, and June seemed to understand what I was thinking.
Cankry thinks I'm important to his plan, that I have a special role to play.
She bowed her head, and I could see tears falling down.
I think he's right. I think that something is happening to me here, and I don't like it. I don't like who I'm turning into. I feel strange.
I woke up on the mat and felt a rustle of the sheet of paper being shoved into my hand. Nepeta was there. I hadn't even heard the door open. I must have been deep under. She put a finger to her lips.
I can't keep passing notes. They'll find out what's happening. Cankry wants to see you and Vriska in the house in the morning. I'm worried that something is going to happen soon. Something bad.
Without another word, she left. I glanced down at Rose's note. Jane, I need the book. Whatever that book Cankry is talking about, I need it. That's the only way we're getting out of here. I can't explain it, but I need the book. Rose. I felt my breathing quicken and my heart start to race. Everything was coming together in a way that made me feel terrified. I had no idea what was going to happen next, but the whole idea scared the shit out of me.
Okay, next chapter. Hold on a second. Chapter 15, Execution. Content warning, this chapter contains a major character death. Okay.
It was almost becoming routine enough that it felt normal at this point. The door would open, I would wake up, and it would be time to go somewhere. My sleeping and waking was so off at that point that I had no idea how many days had passed. I guessed I'd been there at least 2 or 3 days so far, given the number of times I'd been hauled out in the middle of the night. It could have been longer. I had no real way to know. Thankfully, it was Nepeta at the door. She had the same worried expression that she'd been almost perpetually wearing for the last however many days it was.
Cankry wants to see you. Vriska is going to be there as well.
What about Rose? Nepeta shook her head.
I don't know. I'm sorry.
We were outside again. It was nighttime again, so another day was about to roll over. Or had already rolled over. I knew the general way to the house by now, so I followed Nepeta closely and kept my eyes open for anything unusual. It was quiet and still. The residents of my village had all turned in for the night. I could still see lights on at the big lodge, and I suppose there were probably still folks up burning that midnight oil for whatever reason. It would almost be a pleasant situation if it weren't for all the hellish nightmare world nonsense that permeated literally everything. Another trip up through the woods, diverging paths from the big lodge, and we were at Cankry's house. This time, no one was outside the door. Nepeta opened the main door and we walked into the central room. Vriska was already seated in a chair, and Cankry was standing at the far end of the room, holding a pistol of some kind. I had no plan. I needed to get a book whose location I wasn't sure of to Rose somehow without getting anyone killed in the process. It seemed unrealistic. Cankry looked directly at me.
Come in and sit, Jane Crocker.
I did as I was told and took my seat next to Vriska. Cankry walked over towards us.
I believe it is time for our other guests to come join us.
He clapped his hands loudly, and we saw June Egbert walk into the room. Her head was hanging low, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. But she appeared to be intact. I saw Vriska's face explode with joy.
Oh, thank God,
she yelled.
June!
June smiled, but she looked broken down. She stood next to Cankry.
June has graciously agreed to participate in my grand experiment,
he said.
She has come to see the value of what I have suggested. I would hope that you both do as well. Why?
Vriska yelled.
Why would we do that? Oh, Miss Circuit,
Cankry chided.
You have much to learn.
He walked to the corner of the room where a small writing desk stood and opened the top drawer. From it, Cankry retrieved a thick book bound in leather. It looked old and worn, but seemed to be in remarkably good shape. It had to be the book that he had talked about. There was no other explanation.
A circuit and a lalande. The aspect of light. Vitally important. Jane Crocker here represents the aspect of life, another key one. Miss Pyrope, when she joins us, will represent the mind.
He walked back over to where June was standing.
There are many possible choices. I have pondered for many years, but the one I knew we could not do without was Miss Egbert here, the air of breath, the very essence of change itself. For this is what this process is about. It is about change. It is about the extinction of the flawed and the creation of the perfected. What the fuck does that even mean?
Vriska asked, her voice harsh with anger.
Why are you being so damn cryptic all the time?
Cankry shrugged.
I suppose it is my way. I will speak as plainly as I can. I believe that the town of Dunwich concealed a terrible, beautiful secret, the means by which to bring about the end of the world and create an entirely new one. The means to ascend beyond our mortal frames and attain a kind of power only the gods themselves possess.
I won't lie about it. This was sounding more and more disturbing as he went on. But he wasn't even done yet.
From reading the book, I understand that once we begin this process, that fire will rain from the heavens themselves and cleanse this world. Only our chosen few will be allowed to move beyond into our own worlds, into the process by which a new world can be forged. It will not be easy, but it will be worthwhile.
I needed to know how to get that book from him. Needed enough of a distraction to get his focus somewhere else. To let Nepeta, or me, or June, or someone to grab that book and get it to Rose. For some reason that mattered more than anything. I looked over at June, but she dropped her eyes and shook her head. I glared at Cancri. And what if none of us wants to do this? What if we're fine with living in our world?
Such ignorance.
Cancri sneered.
This world is no more yours than it belongs to the ants we trample beneath our feet. But we have the opportunity to make a world that truly belongs to us. Think of it. A world free from all suffering, from all pain, from all injustice. Fuck you,
Vriska yelled. I wasn't sure that antagonizing the man with the gun was necessarily a good idea, but she had her own style.
You're talking about just killing everyone off to feed your own fantasy world. See it however you want, Miss Circuit. I'm saving the world from itself. It would pain me greatly if you weren't involved, but I suppose I can make do.
Vriska stood up from the chair.
This is bullshit. You just destroy everyone and call it justice.
She took a step forward, and I saw Cancri raising the gun.
Ms. Circuit, sit down. Fuck you, you piece of
The sound of the pistol cut her off, and June and I both jumped. I heard Vriska cry out, and she stumbled back into the chair. Cerulean blood was streaming from a wound in her stomach. I didn't know what got into me, but I was up and out of the chair too, moving toward Cancri. It was a bad decision. I heard the gun bark and felt a white-hot lance in my side. I stumbled sideways and fell to the floor, gasping for air. The pain kicked in a moment later, and I was fighting to stay conscious. June was crying. I looked up and saw that she had dropped to her knees and had her hands up. She was begging Cancri to stop, but I couldn't quite make out the words. Cancri walked up to Vriska and looked down at her, his face a mask of stone. He pointed the barrel of the pistol at her head, as she sat there gasping in the chair.
Miss Circuit, do you have any additional comments you'd like to share? Fuck off.
Cancri shrugged and squeezed the trigger. The pistol shouted again in the small room, and Vriska's body jerked back in the chair as a fine cobalt mist sprayed from her head. June was screaming. That made a lot of sense, really. Seeing your gal's brains blown out in front of you. Generally a traumatic experience. I was fighting to stay awake, fighting to remain present, fighting. June was screaming, something about the sound. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. It twisted and wrapped around me, and something shifted. It was as if I was everywhere and nowhere all at once, as if someone was taking me and reshaping my very being. I'd never been dying before, so I had no point of comparison, but it seemed like this was maybe something else. I had to get the book, but my body wasn't even responding anymore. It was hard to even keep focused on anything mentally, let alone try to move. Of course, Cancri still had the gun. If only things weren't moving so slowly now. If only there was some way for me to... June was screaming, and everything went black.
Chapter 16, Traces.
When I woke up, it had been... Actually, I wasn't sure, because I woke up in a plain room with boarded-up windows lit by a single light bulb in the center. As I struggled with the fog over my mind to regain full consciousness, I tried to take stock of the little details around me. The more I could figure out, the more I'd have to work with. And something about it didn't feel right. My head felt strange, like I'd been sleeping for a long time, which almost made sense from blacking out, but not quite. Something else was going on. I just had that hunch, and I've learned not to plan against my hunches. I wasn't tied up. I tried to stand up, but my head was still feeling weird, and it hurt to move too fast. So I settled for sitting on crossed legs and looking around from there. That didn't feel right either. Hadn't June been... It didn't make sense. I thought I saw her in a dream, and she'd spoken to me. The room wasn't large, maybe 10 or 15 feet square, and had a series of 3 small windows all covered with boards. The door The door in the wall had a heavy look to it. It was probably reinforced and almost certainly locked. The boarding on the windows looked tough, too. I seriously doubted I'd be able to break through. The walls and floor were all plain, made of what looked like pine. The only thing resembling furniture was a reed mat that I'd woken up on. Beyond that, the room was completely empty. There was a layer of dust over most of it, marked by only several sets of footprints and a long straight drag mark where I figured they'd hauled me in. And the space around the reed mat disturbed, as if someone had lifted it recently. Carefully, I shifted myself off the mat and peeled up the corner. Underneath, there was a folded slip of paper. I picked it up and saw neat handwriting on the side.
Jane, read this. You have about 20 minutes.
Shaken, I almost dropped the paper. I unfolded it, and the neat handwriting continued.
I can't explain any of what I'm writing to you, but please listen or people will die. Vriska will die. You're going to meet the troll behind this. His name is Kankri. There's another troll named Nepeta who will come by later with food. You can trust her. She's afraid of Kankri and will help us. She's the one who helped place this note. There's a book that Kankri keeps in his house in a writing desk in the corner of the main room. You need to get it and then take it to Rose. Rose is being held in a building somewhere in this village. Nepeta will know where she is. According to Nepeta, JaneRezi is being held in a cell 2 down from yours, and Vriska is in another building set away from the rest of them. Don't tell Vriska about this letter or the book. She didn't respond well the last time, and it ended bad. I don't know if I can do this again. Please keep her safe. Hide this under the mat and wait. Get Rose the book, and I think we'll have a chance. June.
I tucked the note back under the mat. I had so many questions running through my head. Apparently the others were still alive, and June too. I didn't know what most of the letter meant, but I had a strong feeling that if I didn't pay attention, I was going to have some extra ventilation holes somewhere. I played through the conversation with Kankri like I hadn't seen the note, and took the opportunity between then and when Nepeta showed up to talk to JaneRezi. JaneRezi, I know you're in the room over there, and I'm guessing you can hear me. Hit the wall if you can hear me. Thud. This felt familiar, even though I'd never done it before. Deja vu. How about once for yes, twice for no? Sound okay? Yes. I don't know how, but June got a note into my cell, and she knows a lot. Something real weird is happening, and I think we need to be ready to move fast when the time comes. You good to go? Yes. Seriously? No problems? No. Good God, that woman was solid. No hesitation at all. Just ready to go at the drop of a hat. I loved her so damn much. It was a while longer before the troll I assumed was Nepeta showed up and opened the door to my cell. Unkempt hair, short horns, and a soldier's trench coat, holding a tray of food, she looked nervous. Nepeta? She just about dropped the tray and was able to recover her composure.
June told me you know who I was, but I didn't believe her.
I don't know what's going on here, I said. I got a note saying that you were helping us and that Rose needs some kind of book that Kankri has. Nepeta took a step back, her eyes wide.
No, it's no way. He'll kill all of you.
I had no idea if this was true or not. I figured if he wanted us dead, he'd have already killed us, but also, I didn't know that I'd necessarily believe that he had nothing to do with the fella in Boston who had been intent on filling us with rifle-caliber holes. What I'm saying is there was a lot of information against the idea of him not deciding to bury us all in shallow graves. Doll, I don't think that's necessarily going to be avoided by not stealing this book. Is there something you can do? Nepeta looked down at the floor for what felt like a while. Probably only a handful of seconds, but time has a way of expanding when you're under pressure.
Yes.
Her voice was small, distant.
I can do it. He doesn't check on the book much, and he thinks I don't know where it is. But June was very specific. I can get it to Rose this afternoon when he goes to check on the progress of the dig.
I didn't know what the dig was referring to. Wasn't sure I wanted to know. It sounded ominous, and in this line of work, ominous usually meant potentially lethal. I did, however, like the idea of being able to get the heck out of this place as soon as possible. I already knew everyone was alive. We just needed to stay that way. I decided to doze off again, and I had no idea what time it was when I heard the deadbolt slam back and the door was thrown open, waking me with a jolt. I was expecting Nepeta, or maybe Kankri, but instead saw a human, a bearded man with an unfamiliar face. He was holding a shotgun.
Get the fuck up now, bitch!
He yelled at me.
Kankri wants you, and the blind piece of shit in the other room to get your asses to the house right now.
I didn't see much choice in the matter, so I stood up and walked out ahead of the yelling man with a gun. Outside my room there was a hallway that led to 2 similar reinforced doors and a single door that I figured, outside. He stopped to open the door to JaneRezi's cell. It was pitch dark inside. The bastards had been keeping her in the dark. She was blind, true, but still, it felt cruel. I didn't know how well her enhanced senses would work in the dark.
Bitch, get the fuck up!
The man yelled. He certainly had a way with words. JaneRezi stumbled out of the dark room. She looked disoriented, but as soon as she smelled me standing there, her face lit up.
Jane, oh thank God!
She walked forward to hug me, but the yelling man stepped in front of her.
Fucking try it!
He yelled. Of course he yelled.
I'll blow your fucking brains out!
He marched us out the far door and into the cool night air hit me and woke me all the way up. It was dark out and the moon was rising, giving off a pale white glow that made the shadows stand out in a way that only added to the mounting fear I was feeling in my guts. Under armed guard, we walked towards the house where Cankry waited. There were more guards outside, human and troll. I didn't even bother to try to place them beyond the fact that there were a bunch of them and they were all armed. Most had shotguns or rifles, with a couple holding revolvers and one with a Tommy gun. The door to the house was open, so we were led straight in. The main room was decorated with an assortment of furniture that I figured was supposed to look quaint and charming. Right now it felt forced and dishonest. In the very middle of the room was a series of 4 wooden chairs. The far 2 were occupied with Vriska and June. The 2 were linking hands and didn't appear to be tied up in any way. What would be the point, after all? There were at least 3 more guards, all human, in the room with guns, in addition to the yelling, swearing fellow that brought us in. JaneRezi and I were muscled into our chairs. I looked around the room but didn't see Rose. I couldn't imagine why, but it seemed like they were treating her differently. I did see Nepeta. She was cowering in the corner of the room, obviously nervously looking at everyone else. In the very front of the room stood Cankry. He had a look of unbridled fury on his face. When he spoke, his voice was cold as ice.
Which one of you took it?
Took what? Vriska was already shouting.
What the fuck are you talking about? Miss Circuit, if you do not control yourself.
He frowned deeply.
The volume which was contained in my desk in this very room. The volume of forbidden knowledge which has now decided to abscond without the slightest trace of who might be responsible. I come here to engage in my nightly studies, and lo, the book is gone.
He balled up a fist and punched the pine wall of the room with a loud whap. If it had hurt, he showed no sign of it.
Where is Rose?
Vriska again. If she didn't stop, she was going to get herself shot. Cankry glared at her.
That is none of your concern. Ms. Lalonde is under secure guard. Nepeta checked on her just this afternoon, and she will not be allowed out again. For now, I would suggest you all concentrate on how to preserve your own lives in light of this new development.
He paced back and forth along the wall, then wheeled to look at Vriska and June again.
You were both in here today. You both had the opportunity, but which of you had the motive?
This was sounding increasingly like Cankry had no idea what he was talking about. I was just hoping that Vriska would have the good sense to keep her mouth shut.
What?
So much for that thought.
How the fuck would we do that? We've been locked up or under guard the whole time we've been here.
Cankry stopped pacing. He strode over to where Vriska was seated and punched her in the face. She yelped and fell back.
Do not fucking talk to me like that, you goddamn bitch.
And I was seeing a Cankry that I knew was always there. The real person that florid words and calm facade hid most of the time. Vriska reeled back, and I could hear her crying. She was shaking in place, huddled over, whispering, "No, no, no," over and over. I remember what she told me about her experience with Gamzee.
Shut the fuck up!
Cankry shouted. He dashed to the writing desk in the corner and picked up a familiar-looking revolver. That bastard had my revolver. He was back in front of Vriska and pointing the gun at her head.
You shut the fuck up, you goddamn fucking bitch, or I will fucking kill you, and I will kill your stupid fucking bitch of a girlfriend.
I heard June break out into a barely controlled sob. Vriska was still rocking forward in the chair. I had no idea how far gone she was or how easily she could control herself when a deeply unstable Cancri was pointing a gun at her. I saw him pull back the hammer on the revolver, heard the click as it moved to a single feather's pressure on the trigger to set it off. And there was nothing I could do. Even if I got to Cancri before he shot Vriska, he was just going to gun the rest of us down, or the goons in the room would do it for him. There was no way any of us were getting out of this alive. I felt the last bit of hope drain out of me. We had failed. Whatever the book was supposed to do for us, it hadn't worked. June's note. The note. My mind started racing. She'd been here for a few days, but we hadn't. How could she possibly know all those things? Because Nepeta had told her. But Nepeta couldn't have known where the book was. I looked closely at June. She was crying, because of course she was, because her lover was about to be shot. But that didn't feel right. Something about it didn't quite add up. The way her body language was, it was so hard. So hard to think.
What the fuck is she waiting for?
JaneRezi hissed under her breath, and I realized. She was talking about June. Cancri was shaking with rage, and Vriska was still rocking back and forth, and June was crying. But she wasn't losing control. Because she knows what's coming next, was the exact thought I had. I heard JaneRezi hiss at me again.
Hold on now!
And without even thinking about it, I clutched my chair as tightly as I could. There's a certain point where you can't really say you're hearing something so much as simply feeling it. The sensation overwhelms your ability to even process anything else. The noise in that moment was like that, a sound so indescribably vast that it jumped right out of my ability to even properly describe it. And with the noise, there was a flare of purple light, and I could feel myself moving as a wave of energy, like nothing I'd ever experienced, picked me up, turned me sideways, and threw me violently to the floor. As I struggled to get to my feet, I could fear something else coming closer. Something other that had turned its once sleeping eye on us. And it was aware. And it was awake. And it was so very hungry.
Chapter 17. Other.
Glass and fragments of pine rained down as the windows blew out of Cancre's lodge. I'd hit the ground hard, but luckily my head had avoided the impact, so I was at least coherent enough to tuck into myself and avoid the worst of the fragments as they shot through the air and skittered over the floorboards. Cancre had lost the revolver when we'd all been knocked sideways. One of his hired goons had dropped their rifle, and one had somehow managed to hold onto their shotgun and stay upright. And the last one was lying on the floor with a pool of blood starting to expand from a gaping wound in his head where he'd struck a table. Yelling, swearing fella was on his back, clutching his shotgun and looking extremely disoriented. I was still so out of it I could barely see straight. I was basically useless. JaneRezi, however, was not. I saw her dart forward, leap into the air, and dive forward to grab my revolver where it had fallen. I had no idea how someone with no ability to see was able to do that, but it was gosh darn amazing to watch. She rolled into a crouch and fired a single shot at the standing guard, hitting him in the face. Blood sprayed on the wall, and he was down like a sack of rocks.
Nepeta, get the gun!
She yelled out. I saw a fast-moving blur as Nepeta ran over and picked up the shotgun. Sweary was still on the ground, but he was about to not be. JaneRezi must have heard him moving because our next two shots connected with his gut and head, respectively. I'll admit I felt a lot of satisfaction at that one. The last guard simply turned and ran out of the room. So at least someone had some common sense. Cancre was reeling around, trying to find his footing. JaneRezi reached him in 3 bounding steps and slammed the heavy revolver into the side of his head. There was a surprisingly wet crunch, and he keeled over and fell like a sack of rocks, hitting the wooden floor hard.
We need to get the fuck out of here!
JaneRezi was yelling even as she bent over to help Vriska and June up off the floor. I had regained enough composure to retrieve the bolt-action rifle that one of the guards had dropped before fleeing. Thinking better of it, I handed the rifle off to JaneRezi and grabbed the shotgun from the floor next to Sweary's body. JaneRezi checked the chamber and grunted, satisfied that everything was in order. I was still having trouble standing up straight, and it looked like June was sharing my problem. Vriska seemed weirdly unaffected. It was like she was running on nothing but pure spite now. She walked over, kicked Cancre's still form once, and looked around quickly for a gun. I guess she didn't find anything, because she walked back over to June and put an arm around the swaying woman, helping her keep her balance.
Okay, people. Last train is leaving the fucking station.
Terezi walked forward to the door, followed by the rest of us, with Nepeta bringing up the rear. As we stepped out into the moonlit night, I immediately saw the eerie purple glow that was cast over everything. It seemed to be emanating from the sky itself, and I found all my hairs standing on end for reasons I couldn't explain. More guards were outside, mostly disoriented. Some had already fled. The Tommy gun guard was a troll who must have had a hardy constitution, because he raised his iron like he was going to throw down. A quick shot to the head from Terezi's rifle fixed that, and now Vriska had a Tommy gun to play with. Cycling the bolt with a smoothness that I found almost disturbing, Terezi wheeled and placed another shot into a guard's chest before she had the chance to level the shotgun she was holding at us. A follow-up to the head a second later put her out of whatever misery she would have experienced.
Does anyone have a fucking clue where we're going?
Terezi yelled out, Nepeta round out in front of us. I do. I know where to go to get out, but we need to get to Rose first. I looked up at the purple-lit sky. As I watched, there was a strange flash like lightning coming down from below the tree line and a loud crack through the air. Another wave of energy, much less powerful than the one that had knocked us down, but leaving the same sensation, blasted through the air. In the distance, the sound of gunfire sounded off, followed by another flash crack, and then the gunfire went dead silent. I have a feeling Rose is gonna meet us at the exit, I said. This, along with another round of gunfire, flash, crack, silence, seemed to satisfy Nepeta, and she ran ahead for us to follow. Calling it silence wasn't exactly right, though. After every time the light flashed, there was a low humming noise that seemed to grow to greater and greater intensity. The light became more and more strange. I say it was purple because that's the closest I can think of to put into words, but in reality, it seemed to be a color that didn't actually exist. A strangely pearlescent shade that defied existence itself. Most of the villagers we encountered were running for their lives now, or running towards the large building I could see in the distance whenever the light allowed. Some kind of shelter, or something. It wasn't important. We kept running. June got her legs back, and Vriska let her go so she could actually use the Tommy gun. Her timing was fantastic, because we ran into a nasty-looking human who decided he was going to stop us from leaving.
Get back right the fuck now!
He yelled, waving a pistol at us. Without a word, Vriska fired the Tommy gun, and the man dropped without a sound. We kept running. As we were making our way to the final stretch of clear ground, I looked back and saw Rose in the distance. At least, I thought it was her. She was surrounded by a swirling haze, the same color that was lighting up the sky. She waved her hands, and it moved, coalescing and dispersing and reforming all around her like electric mist. She was moving fast, too fast, and coming straight toward us. I watched as a group of trolls and humans ran up to her with guns. They fired, but nothing seemed to happen, and Rose waved a hand. The light flared so brightly that I had to turn my eyes away, and the thunderous crack sounded. And when I was able to look again, the attackers were gone. The low hum got a bit louder. We stood there, fixed to the spot, and waited as Rose approached us. She got closer and closer. The terrifying hum seemed to follow with her. When she was just a few yards away, I saw her face. She was terrified. We need to run. It's coming. She managed to stammer out this and no more. The light around her vanished, as if someone had switched an electric light bulb off, and Rose collapsed in a heap on the ground. I ran over, putting my hand to her neck. She's alive. Help me carry her, I yelled. Vriska tossed the Tommy gun and ran to grab Rose's legs. I hoisted her under her shoulders, leaving my own shotgun behind. Together, we were able to carry her without a great deal of difficulty. The low humming wasn't getting quieter. In fact, it seemed to be getting louder, incredibly fast.
We need to leave now!
June sounded like she was about to panic. It's coming! I didn't stop to ask what it was, or what any of this meant. I simply helped Vriska haul Rose with us the rest of the way to the train tunnel. We barreled inside and kept moving as fast as we could. The hum was behind us now, along with a weird light, but it was getting brighter and louder, and my head was starting to hurt badly. When we got to the other side of the tunnel, beyond the hills that concealed the unnamed village from prying eyes, we stopped to take a short breather. I could still faintly hear the hum, and the glow was visible beyond the trees, but the area around us was quiet and lit only by the moon. It didn't exactly feel safe, but it felt safe enough to stop for a minute. I helped set Rose down on the dirt and walked over to Terezi. She was visibly shaking.
Jane.
She dropped the rifle to the ground and fell to her knees. I bent down and wrapped my arms around her.
There's something back there. something huge.
I looked out over the hills, beyond the tunnel, and I could almost make it out, a shadowed form rising up above the trees, so large that we were as ants to it. JaneRezi was digging her nails into my arm.
Oh, God, Jane. Please don't let it see us. Please don't let it see us.
All of a sudden, I wanted to scream. Somehow I felt like that would be the worst thing to do. So I sat there, holding JaneRezi close, and I watched. I watched the shadows dance among the light, which had now transcended my ability to describe it. I watched the light grow in intensity until it was almost painful to look at, even from this distance. I heard the low hum rise and change and become something else. JaneRezi's face twisted into a grimace, and she put her hands over her ears, trying desperately to block the noise out. I looked over and saw June sitting on the ground, her face wide and staring, looking back at the unnamed village. Looking back at the place where Dunwich had once been, lore-haunted Dunwich, the city that had disappeared into the ground. And I didn't know how I knew that. I had never heard the name Dunwich before in my life. But maybe I felt like I had heard it before. In some vague way, in some other version of my life. These thoughts screamed in my mind. They became so much I couldn't bear it. I saw things racing through there, people and places and things I knew I'd never seen, generations living and dying and uncovering dark secrets. Secrets that were buried, secrets that had been unearthed. The light flared, the sound rose to its crescendo, and the switch went off, and everything was dark and silent. And in the distance, I could smell burning pine, and what I thought smelled vaguely of burning meat. JaneRezi was crying next to me, shaking and weeping into my chest where she'd pressed herself. She held her nose against the smell.
Those people. Oh, those people.
She muttered it to herself and shook her head as if trying to clear something from it. And I wasn't sure if she was talking about the people living in the unnamed village, or the people who lived in Dunwich, the village I had no right to know anything about, yet still did. I held her as closely as I could, held her until the shivering stopped and the sobbing turned to gentle weeping turned to silence. Only then did I let my embrace slacken and push myself to my feet again. Vriska and June were on the ground as well, near Rose's unconscious body. June was looking down at the ground now. In the pale moonlight, she looked drawn out and hollow. I heard her mutter to herself. It sounded like it worked that time, but I couldn't be sure. Slowly, resignedly, we picked ourselves up and carried Rose back to the car. Once we were all safely inside, Vriska stepped behind the wheel and began to drive. I leaned my head over on JaneRezi's shoulder, closed my eyes, and fell into a dreamless sleep.
Chapter 18, Narrative Contrivance. North End, Boston.
I'd slept most of the way into Boston. Vriska had driven slowly but steadily, and we'd entered the city sometime during the night. From the moon, I was guessing it was probably still around before midnight, at least. After a brief discussion in the car, the others had apparently agreed to do the thing to do would be to go to talk to Dirk Strider. We understood that he was the acting head of the Boston Council and would probably appreciate being told about the strange death cult an hour and a half north of Boston that had apparently just vanished in a supernatural incident of immense proportion. I doubted we'd put it like that. Maybe just explain it away as a fire. All those pine buildings were basically tinderboxes after all. He would also surely be grateful to know that poor Miriam was not, in fact, insane. It seemed that the same influences that had been tormenting myself and the others had also been affecting her. I had a feeling that was going to change. We pulled up outside the social club and Vriska parked the car. She took a heavy breath.
I can do this by myself if you want, she said. You can all just wait here.
I shook my head. Forget it. We'll all go. We started to get out, all except Rose, who stayed seated. I I'm going to stay here. I didn't ask why. Didn't feel like I needed to. She definitely earned a bit of a break. So we left Rose in the car, and the rest of us walked in through the same doors we'd been in several times before. No one here. Everything was unlocked. But the lights were on upstairs, so I was guessing Dirk was here. Clock in the bar said it was around 11 at night. It felt later, but I wasn't going to complain. We could get a damn drink after. There was no guard by the back door, and it was unlocked, too. Dirk was pretty confident about his ability to keep himself safe. He was a big fella, sure, but that seemed careless. Surely enough, Dirk was in his, and it was his now, wasn't it, office. The desk was the same one that Porum had used. The place had been cleaned up, and Dirk was sitting there toying idly with a pocket knife. A glass of some alcohol was sitting in front of him. He looked tired. He also, strangely enough, didn't look surprised to see us. Honestly, though, I doubted he was the kind of man who ever looked surprised.
"What are y'all doing here?"
he asked, a bit of a southern accent of some kind poking through his normally flawless regionless dialect.
"Y'all look like shit."
He laughed and looked directly at Nepeta.
"And who the fuck is this?"
Nepeta looked confused, but she didn't say anything. She shook her head and Dirk shrugged.
"Whatever. It doesn't matter."
Vriska walked right up to the desk and slammed her hands down in front of him. He jumped.
"Listen, you shit,"
she growled.
"There is an entire town full of fucking death cultists an hour north of here. You want to know what all the weird cult shit is about? It's about the fucking cult you have poking around."
Dirk raised an eyebrow.
"That's absurd." "Fuck you,"
Vriska shot back. I was just sitting back and watching the exchange like a dang baseball game.
"They've got posters and stuff all over town. Down where June works for the church, the entire town of Seaward Vale, as far as we can tell. You want to make sure the council isn't threatened? Get Porum back and get some of your boys to go rouse those pieces of shit."
Dirk looked at Vriska for a second, then shook his head.
"Porum can't come back. She tried to hang herself just tonight. Started screaming about a shadow over the world and wouldn't stop until they gave her a shot of something strong."
I interrupted. As uproariously entertaining as this was, it wasn't getting us anywhere. "She's right. You need to figure out what you're going to do, because you've got some very bad folks hanging around. We're pretty sure a lot of them were killed in a fire, but there are still going to be others around." I paused, then added, "We really do need to talk to Porum, by the way."
"Sure."
Dirk shrugged.
"Drive out to Miskatonic in the morning. I don't see why that'd be a problem. In the meantime, can y'all kindly fuck off and let me drink in peace?"
And that was it, I supposed. We went back down the stairs and out to the car. When we got there, JaneRezi stopped and looked back.
"Oh, fuck this,"
she said.
"I need a damn drink."
There was a bar down the street that was both open and not particularly crowded. Basically the perfect combination at this point. All of us went in, even Rose. She looked like she was about to fall over, but she went in anyway. Inside the bar was, well, it was a bar. Dim lighting, a counter with stools, and a bunch of tables and some booths in the corner. Vriska walked up to the bar, asked for a bottle of the cheapest whiskey they had and 6 glasses, and we all took a seat in the furthest booth. I didn't drink like I used to, but I was drinking tonight. We each had a couple glasses of the booze. It was foul, but it was also alcoholic. Rose was looking especially out of sorts. She had her head down and her face was drawn.
"What the fuck happened?"
Vriska was, of course, the one to be blunt about it.
"Rose, what the fuck was that?"
Rose shook her head. "I don't really remember much of it."
"You wanna maybe fucking try?"
Vriska poured herself another drink and downed it in one gulp.
"We almost fucking died out there."
Vriska in particular, I thought. Twice. And why the heck did I think that of all things? I shook my head as if that was going to clear it up. Rose sighed heavily. She took a sip from her drink and started talking. "Nepeta got me the book that afternoon, just like she was supposed to. I don't know who originally wrote it. There were no names or anything. I don't actually remember much of what was inside, just that everything got kind of fuzzy. Not just fuzzy like I couldn't remember stuff, more like I wasn't quite existing in the same world as before. And then everything just kind of went dark. I saw things, though. Other worlds. Places I don't think people were ever supposed to see. All these strange beings. And they looked up to me like I was some kind of god. Towering spires and a chain stretching into the heavens. And then all of that went dark and quiet, and there was something else. Something looming above all of that. Something so vast and horrifying that my mind just kind of shut it out. The thing above the village, the shadowed monstrosity that had stretched into the sky and then vanished as if nothing had ever been there. Rose took another drink, this time most of the glass. There was something there, something buried or hidden. I don't know the right word for it. I think my mother knew about it, at least a little bit. I think she was trying to keep those secrets away from the world, to keep Dunwich buried forever. I'm scared, to be honest, because I don't know what that was, because my mind couldn't even wrap itself around what was happening. And I feel like that's going to be a part of me forever. Rose shivered and down the rest of the drink. She went quiet. There might have been more to her thoughts, but Rose wasn't sharing them. Something else was on my mind. I leaned over to June. June, can I talk to you for a minute, just you and me? She nodded and we stood up and walked over to the corner of the bar, outside of hearing range. Well, not outside of Terezi's hearing range, but I felt like Terezi already knew a part of what I was going to talk about. There wasn't an easy way to say this, mostly on account of it sounding completely crazy. You knew what was going to happen before it happened, I said plainly. You knew that Vriska wasn't going to be shot, and you knew that whatever the heck it was going to happen. How? Rose gets the power to blow up a goddamn village, and you? What? You can see the future now? June looked down at the floor. I couldn't read her expression. I kind of wished I'd grabbed Terezi to smell out what she was feeling. June, come on. I'm not going to tell anyone. I just need to know what the hell is happening. She groaned.
I can't see the future. Not exactly. Oh geez, this is going to sound so insane.
I actually laughed at that. June, I just saw a village razed to the ground by a shadow that looked like it was 2 miles tall. I shared dreams about a place I'd never been to with a troll I'd never met before. You want to tell me about crazy? Get in the dang line. She smiled.
Okay, but I didn't see the future. I lived it.
That didn't really make sense. My expression clearly said that it didn't make any sense, because June drew herself up again and tried again.
Everything was going along, and then Vriska got shot in the head.
June was starting to cry.
She died.
I looked over at Terezi and saw that she'd perked her head up slightly. She was hearing this too.
When she died, I lost it, and then everything kind of unwound. I was back in the room in Kankri's house, and it was right after you all showed up, I think. But I still remembered everything that had happened. So I knew to tell Nepa to get the book, except she groaned. It didn't work at first. She tried to steal it, and Kankri caught her, and she got killed. Then they just kind of... Crying was getting worse. I leaned in and put a hand on her shoulder. They just went in and killed everyone.
Deep breath. She steadied herself.
So everything went back again. And that time I knew what to do about the book. So I got the book to Rose, and then that thing happened with her, but none of you were there. You were all still locked up, and you all died again, but this time it was because of Rose, and she didn't even mean it.
She took a gulping breath, and it came out as a sigh.
So I tried one last time, but this time I made sure to say something to get Kankri to check on his book. I was lucky. He didn't know who took it, so he called all of you in, except Rose. I knew he wouldn't bother with her because he had some kind of special plans for her, but I knew when it was going to happen.
I looked at Terezi again, and she had this, of course, look on her face. She was smiling back at me. It made a lot more sense now.
I knew that you and Vriska and Terezi would get us out of here. Vriska doesn't... She doesn't like to talk about what happened in New York, but I know it was more than what she said.
June looked at me, and I could see a kind of spark in her eyes. This was a woman who was used to hiding who she was to the world, but never from herself. She saw everything. She knew far more than she let on.
I know there's stuff inside her that she maybe doesn't like very much. Stuff she's done, people she's hurt. But she's working hard to not be that person. She's never made me feel unsafe, and I know she'll do anything to protect me.
It was true. I remembered it vividly. Mina Pisces with a knife in her gut and Vriska growling at her. Her name is pronounced June, and you're a piece of shit. I locked eyes with June. I think you're right about that.
I'm scared, she said. I'm scared of what all this means. I feel like there's this thing inside me. I don't even know where it came from, and I'm not even sure how I control it. I don't even know if it'll work again. It feels like something I shouldn't have, that no one should have.
She was crying again.
I don't want it. Even if it's something I can do whatever I want, whenever I want. This isn't right. I was so scared when Vriska died. Everything felt broken. I couldn't help myself that first time, but...
June paused and took a deep, halting breath.
What if I get used to it? What if I start changing things because I just feel like it? What if I start hurting people? I can't do that.
She shook her head.
It was so hard to just be me, you know? So hard to be who I really am. I don't want to start becoming something else. I don't want to hurt the people. The person I love.
That was something I could relate to. Maybe not the ability to literally change the past so much, but the part about hurting people you cared about. That was something I was fairly well acquainted with the concept of. Look, June, I said, I know Vriska cares about you more than pretty much anything. She'll do anything she can to keep you safe and make sure you're happy. If you don't want whatever this is to be a part of you, I think she'll do whatever she can to keep it in check.
That's what scares me the most. I don't even know if that's possible. I wasn't really controlling it before. I just kind of did it like it was something I'd always knew how to do before, but never even realized it.
I shrugged. I was so tired that even this kind of conversation wasn't fazing me. Maybe it was being close to Dunwich. The name I'd known without knowing why. This was starting to make a lot more sense now, in light of what June told me. I wondered what other dark secrets I'd once known.
Maybe.
June looked thoughtful.
Maybe that's it. In that case, I need to be far away from this place.
She went silent again, and it didn't really seem like she wanted to keep talking, so I suggested we move back to the table. The bottle of whiskey had run dry, and Nepeta was stacking the empty glasses on top of each other. We wisely agreed that we should call it a night. Charlestown, Massachusetts. I guess trolls process alcohol differently than humans, because Vriska had probably had the most to drink of any of us, and she was completely fine driving back to the townhouse that she and June shared just across the river from Boston proper. The place was huge, and I found myself wondering just how well Vriska had done for herself in the whole crime gig. Well enough, I imagined. It was well after midnight by the time we arrived, so Vriska showed JaneRezi and me to a spare bedroom, told us there were robes in the drawer, and promptly went to show Nepeta and Rose to their rooms and presumably pass out for several hours. The room was small, but it actually had the bed in the middle instead of a reed mat, and that was definitely an upgrade from our last accommodations. Before I could take stock of the room, JaneRezi had pretty much tackled me. We were back against the wall, and she was crying. A lot.
Oh, God, I thought you were gonna fucking die.
I was never used to this. JaneRezi was like a piece of hard, brittle stone. She was tough, but when she broke, she shattered. I put my arms around her waist and nuzzled into her hair. I'm not dead. We're not dead, and... oh, God, we smell awful. She laughed at that, and I was glad.
I think there's a bathroom attached to the room.
She was right. Vriska had apparently spared no expense and had a small room attached to the bedroom with a tub in the center. I went inside and ran the water until it was hot and the steam was filling the small bathroom. I turned back from the tub once it was full. JaneRezi was standing there, naked and smiling at me. This wasn't a new sight to me. We'd been together for years, and I'd seen her naked more times than I could count. But that didn't make it any less... I don't know. The words are failing a bit. The gal looked darn good is where I'm going with this. I traced my eyes up and down the gray skin I'd seen so many times, along the curves and dips and little marks on the skin, along the scars. She'd told me about them once, the first time I'd seen her body, which had been under considerably less appealing circumstances. That hurt my heart a little every time I saw those marks, that someone had been so willing to be so cruel to the gal I loved. I took my own clothing off and stowed it neatly on the chair in the bedroom. I wasn't joking before. We both smelled pretty bad after having been back and forth without a bath or change of clothes for several days now. The haunting odor of blood and gunpowder and something else I couldn't quite put my finger on wasn't helping anything either. It must have been a nightmare for JaneRezi with her heightened sense of smell. She wrinkled her nose, even as she was smiling at me at seeing me undress.
Okay, we're doing the bath thing first. No question, we both smell like shit.
I didn't know if she was being literal, but I generally agreed. The tub was large enough for both of us to fit, so I lowered myself in, and JaneRezi splashed into the water right in front of me. She leaned back into me, and we both sat there and soaked up the heat of the water. It felt so good to just be relaxing for once. I wasn't even going to wash right away. JaneRezi pressed herself back into me and sighed. I reached out and wrapped my arms around her, pulling her back into my chest and eliciting a kind of squeak when I placed a hand on one of her breasts. This close, I could feel her breathing against me.
I can hear your heart,
she said softly.
I was afraid I wasn't ever going to hear it again.
Her head was back against my shoulder, and one of her velvet-covered horns tickled my nose. I kissed it, and she giggled.
You could be pretty goddamn cute for such a tough dame, Jane.
I hugged her, and she leaned my face towards hers, leaning in to kiss her neck. I think that, more than anything, we both wanted to be comforted right then. It had been hell in the past few days, and we were just now starting to feel safe again.
I guess.
JaneRezi started to talk and trailed off for a second.
I never gave it a lot of thought, but we all came from somewhere other than Earth. I was one of the first Alternians hatched on Earth, but we didn't even originally come from the same, the same universe. If we were out there, what other kind of crazy shit is?
She sighed again and pushed her head back up against my neck. Her horn tickled me, and I kissed it again. I've been trying not to think about it too much, I said. Whatever it is, that's what it is. Worrying about me doesn't change any of that, and we'll deal with it when the time comes.
I wish I could be like that. I really try, but I keep worrying about things. All the different possible angles. It's hard for me.
I know, I said quietly, talking into her ear. I know it's hard. And I know you can't just let this drop. We'll follow up tomorrow, once we've had some sleep and something to eat. You know, there's probably a good bit of innuendo in the last thing I said. I know there is, as a matter of fact, but it's not really any of your business. It felt like we were working through some stuff, JaneRezi and I. Days of frustration and fear and confusion. The idea that either of us could see the other one snuffed out before our very eyes. When all was said and done, and I mean that mostly in the sense of done and a lot less of said, I will say that we did eventually fall asleep. Tangled up together, still naked, smelling a lot less like 4-day-old dirt and a lot more like lavender soap and newly minted sweat. When sleep finally overtook me, I wish I could say it was restful. I wish I could say I didn't dream. I wish I could say it, but it would be a lie.
Come on, where's the cursor? There's the cursor. Chapter 19. The chapter where the story just completely goes off the rails. Chapter 19, Awareness. Content warning, this chapter contains discussions of suicide as well as several major character deaths.
This really is such an inconvenience.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I really like writing their relationship, and it continues on in the third one as well. And the ending that they get is actually really, really nice.
This really is an inconvenience. Even if it had turned out the way I expected, which it certainly did not. I wasn't expecting someone else to be so involved.
It was hard to pin this down. I was clearly dreaming. I had the same feeling as the dreams I'd been having so frequently before, but something had changed. It felt less like a premonition, more like I was listening in on something I wasn't supposed to be hearing.
It's not like I can't make this work. It's still new. I'm still getting used to it, but she is too. She's afraid of what she is, but I'm not afraid of what I am. That's the difference. That's what makes this work. Fuck. I can't believe I even have to go through all this. He was such a fucking idiot to try to play it like that. Well, now he's fucking dead, and I'm not sorry.
Even if I could go back, I wouldn't. He deserved it. I almost wanted to call out to whoever this was. Almost. But I also felt like that would be a mistake. This wasn't quite a dream. There was something wrong here. Wait, who's there? Oh, hell no. This isn't gonna be a thing. You don't get to spy on me like this, and then you just carry on about your merry way in the morning. Fuck that shit. I could feel something reaching inside my head, and I screamed. I woke up the next morning, feeling groggy, but glad I hadn't dreamed. JaneRezi had already been up before me, and I could smell something downstairs cooking. I stumbled out of bed, put on one of the robes Vriska had talked about, and walked down to the kitchen. Vriska and June were cooking ham on a skillet with the help of Nepeta, who was trying to steal bits of it. JaneRezi was sitting at the table with a cup of coffee, wearing the same kind of robe as I was.
Morning. Sleep okay?
She said with a very obvious wink. I blushed and went to sit down with her.
Okay, people,
Vriska said.
So we're going to the asylum today.
And that was a very normal way to start the day off. Of course, normal was something I'd left behind ages ago. I agree, I said. Whatever happened with Porum, I think it was directly connected to what happened to us last night. We should at least talk to her. I grabbed the mug of coffee from in front of JaneRezi and took a long sip before she could protest. And how do you expect the talking to Porum? Oh, God, how do you drink that without sugar? JaneRezi shrugged and grinned, taking the mug back. I shook my head.
Honestly,
Vriska said, turning away from the sizzling ham,
I don't think Dirk was telling us the truth about Porum. Maybe she tried to hang herself, and maybe she didn't. But something about this all feels suspicious, like there's a loose thread that's still tickling us.
I was inclined to agree. My sense for this case might have been off in the beginning, but I still had a strong Why would you think that there's anything here beyond? That there were unanswered questions still out there. Maybe Porum knew something, maybe she didn't. It wouldn't hurt to find out. Miskatonic, Massachusetts. It was just me, JaneRezi, Vriska, and June. Rose had asked to stay behind in the townhouse, and Nepet had seemed all too eager to stay behind with her. I wasn't going to object. Getting 4 people into the asylum without drawing a horrific amount of attention already seemed like a tall order. And I wasn't going to make it even worse by trying to add folks that didn't even want to be there in the first place. We were back inside the austere main lobby of the Miskatonic Asylum, a place I desperately hoped to never see again. Excuse me. When this was over, I was planning to leave and never come anywhere near this place for the foreseeable future.
We're here to see Arania, Circuit, and Porum Miriam working a case with Pyrope and Crocker.
Vriska accentuated the verbal flourish with a full 10 spot on the front desk. The attendant took it and narrowed his eyes. Circuit's on isolation right now. It'll be a minute. You can talk to Miriam, but it's only one of you at a time allowed in there. You gotta leave any weapons here. We knew the deal. We handed everything over at the desk and went with the orderly, a different but equally physically imposing man than the last time that we were here. I was getting the sense that the asylum prioritized being able to manhandle patients and basically nothing else in terms of their staff selection. It was familiar enough from the last time that I knew where to go. And what is it do you think you're going to accomplish heading down here like this? Didn't you learn anything from New York about leaving everything the fuck, at least in the general sense? When we got to Porum's cell, my experience in the unnamed village didn't let me see it any differently. The orderly stopped and looked at us. Only one, he said sternly. The others looked at me. Guess that was my cue, so I raised my hand and stepped forward. The orderly opened the door and let me inside. Porum was sitting in the middle of the barren room, cross-legged on the padded floor, staring at the wall. She turned as she heard the door close behind me. I couldn't tell if the expression on her face was happy at seeing a familiar face or distressed for having to be there in the first place. A bit of both, I suppose. At this point, Jane knew that she needed to turn around and go back home. She'd already run the case to the ground. She'd uncovered every last secret, and everyone involved was dead anyway. There was nothing left for her to do, and she had a chance to go home and be free of I had a weird sensation in my head. A sense of something foreign inside my mind, a kind of tickle in the back of my head. Porum, I said, I wasn't going to bother with that Miss Miriam nonsense, not anymore. We need to talk. She looked at me and said nothing. I've been to the tunnel you see in your dreams. I've been to the village where those missing people ended up. I've seen what they all worship, the shadow over everything. Her eyes were pure fear, and Jane knew that she wasn't going to get anything useful out of Purim. Whatever had happened, it was something that couldn't be reversed. It couldn't. I wasn't sure what to make of the expression, but she looked terrified. The shadow is gone, I said. We saw it vanish. The village is ash by now. All those people are dead. The good ones, the bad ones, they're all gone. And there's nothing we could have done about it. But you're free now. No. Purim's voice was shaking and quiet. She sounded nothing like the person I first met in Boston. No. Not free. Not anymore. It wasn't wise to ask too many questions, Jane knew. Questions had answers. Answers led to more questions, and the answers to those questions, they were often the sorts of things that could never be unknown. The kind of answers that drove you to madness. I looked closely at Purim's face, at her throat where the rope had left a deep green bruise. I winced without meaning to. Given what I'd seen in the last few days, I could understand how she'd gotten to that point. What do you mean? Kangri is dead. Purim laughed. She actually looked me in the eyes and laughed. Kangri? You honestly believe that he... If she had any more to say, it was choked off as she started to sob. All Jane could see was a broken woman, unable to even get her head above water, and she finished, looking down at the floor. I hadn't caught that last bit. My head was starting to hurt badly. I know Arania was there too, I said. Vriska too, technically. She was a tiny grub. They were taken out of the village before it burned the first time. I'm not sure by who. I was meaning to ask Arania if she even knew. Purim laughed again. Like it even matters. Like it even matters. You know that... She looked down again, unable to continue any further. Jane realized that this was a pointless exercise. Why bother with any of this bullshit when she could just go home with JaneRezi? Back to their life in New York, back to their cases. Even June and Vriska could go home. Everyone that was involved in this case was dead or irrelevant. Oh God, why did my head hurt so much? I kept trying to pay attention to what Purim was saying, trying to angle around it. She was so convinced that something was still out there, and I suppose that she was right. There was almost certainly members of the Order of the Creator still in Boston. At the very least. Seaward Vale, too. They need to be rooted out. But with their leader gone and their village a smoking pile of rubble, maybe it wouldn't be so hard. Never mind, I said. I need to talk to Arania, too. I'll be back later. Purim looked at me, locked eyes with me, smiled a sad, soft smile. You see, Jane. I walked over and pounded on the door. The orderly let me out, and I saw that the others were all looking at me, expectantly. I shook my head. I don't know. She's not doing great. Doesn't seem to believe it's really over. I guess it hit her pretty hard. Vriska groaned.
This is gonna stir some shit up. She was basically gluing this whole thing together.
I don't know, I said. Dark seemed to be pretty level-headed. Maybe he can help keep things together for a bit. JaneRezi made a small noise, like she was clearing her throat. I looked at her, and she was looking at me. I got closer, and she put a hand out to pull me in, putting her lips near my ear and whispering,
You remember that smell I was telling you about? The weird smell I couldn't place?
I nodded.
I smell it here as well, and it was in the village, all over. I think it's something about the plants or the soil there. Something kind of sour and pungent. It was so strong.
That made me nervous. I suppose it wasn't outside the realm of possibility to think that one of the Order had been here, but it still made me nervous. But I didn't feel like JaneRezi was done.
There's something else, though, she whispered. There was one other place I noticed it. One other person specifically. I smelled the same.
JaneRezi was being utterly ridiculous. She knew as well as anyone that the only members of the Order still left behind were mere followers. With Kangri dead, there was nothing truly left. Merely a body without a head, waiting to die. Jane knew this better than anyone else. Gosh darn, my head is hurting, I exclaimed, stepping back from JaneRezi, who was looking confused. I don't know why. Can we just go talk to Arania and get the heck out of here? Vriska and June looked over at each other, their faces betraying confusion and worry. JaneRezi put a hand on my arm.
Are you okay, Jane? Jane was fine, of course. She wanted to leave the asylum, which was only natural. But if you just...
I'm okay, I said. I feel like crap. When we figure out what we need to figure out, we can leave.
Okay,
JaneRezi said, looking closely at me.
but what about Purim? Did she say anything else useful? I know she's not doing well, that was implied, but what the hell does she know about any of this? If anything.
I don't know, I snapped back. I was starting to feel defensive. I was telling them everything already. She just doesn't know much. I think she was more in the dark than I thought. I turned and waved to the orderly. Can you take us to Arania Circuit now? Today, if it's not too much trouble. The orderly grunted, and we turned the hall and walked toward the cell where Arania had been before. As we were rounding the corner, the short doctor from the other day nearly collided with us. He muttered an apology and kept walking quickly down the hall.
What the fuck was his problem?
Vriska asked, looking angry.
Jackass.
We got to the door, and the orderly opened it, revealing a darkened room inside.
One at a time. You know the drill.
He said. I nodded, and Jane knew this wasn't necessary. The last time she talked to Urania, the troll had barely been able to form a coherent thought. Now Jane was expecting her to provide useful information. That was absurd. If she had any sense, she'd tell the guard to close the door and walk back. I know the drill, I responded, and I stepped through the door into the dark cell. There was enough light to make out the hunched form of Arania Circuit sitting in the middle of the cell, but something felt off about this. Something was wrong. I walked closer. She didn't turn to respond to me. Closer. I was close enough to touch her shoulder. She didn't move, didn't respond. I saw her eyes open, glassy. She was dead. Jane screamed. I didn't scream. I didn't lose my composure because this wasn't the first dead body I'd seen, and something felt incredibly wrong here. There was a discarded syringe by the body, and I had no doubt if the light was better, I would have been able to see the marks on her arms where the injection was made. She was still warm. This couldn't have happened more than a few minutes ago. I thought about the doctor practically running down the hallway. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. I stood up and ran to the door. Jane just couldn't keep her fucking nose out of shit she didn't belong in, and now she saw that the orderly was holding JaneRezi back. Vriska and June were standing there, motionless, because standing across from them, I saw Dirk Strider holding a Colt pistol that looked very much like JaneRezi's.
I knew it, you fucker!
JaneRezi was yelling.
Jane, I told you I smelled it on this bastard. I wasn't sure the first time because he was covering it up with fucking aftershave, but god fucking damn it.
My head was still hurting. Dirk was standing there, a big grin on his face, waving the gun. Miss Crocker, I'm gonna need you to step right over on by y'all's friends. That accent poking out again. Something about his voice. I couldn't place it. Jane didn't worry about trying to place Dirk's voice because that wasn't important right now. God damn, that is exhausting right now, Dirk said, dropping back out of the Texas accent by the end. I gave you all every opportunity to leave this alone. Are you insane? I was almost screaming at him. Do you have any idea what we saw in that village? Horm isn't crazy. She saw the same thing we did, only we saw it in real life. Dirk shook his head. I fucking know that, you fools. I funded this ridiculous operation. I knew about his plans to try to bring about the end of the world and make a new world and all that nonsense. That was news to me, but still, it had the same faint familiar quality as other things, so maybe I'd learned it before June changed everything. The point seemed mostly academic right then. So what do you want from us? I asked. I don't want anything from any of you. He snapped back. I wanted you all to go back to your homes and lives and leave me alone.
You're hiding something.
It was JaneRezi. She was glaring. She was furious.
You were in that village a lot. Enough to smell like it. Harm didn't know about this, and you must have been on good terms with Cancri. What the fuck were you two doing?
Dirk laughed at JaneRezi and clicked his tongue. Cancri was a useful fool. He dug up lots of things, but the only thing that mattered to me was the book. I wasn't following. I knew the book was powerful because it had something to do with Rose's powers, but that had seemed more like losing control than anything else. Why would he want to do that? No, you fool.
Dirk said, "Not like whatever nonsense happened to Rose. The book held other secrets."
I stared. I hadn't said that part out loud. He was reading my mind.
Don't be banal.
Dirk looked right at me.
How's your head been feeling, Miss Crocker?
It was hurting, a lot, still hurting. Hurting ever since that morning. It kept coming and going and getting worse.
We are all in control of our own narratives, our own lives. That was a thought that Jane Crocker had given considerable weight to.
Dirk was smiling at me. He looked like he just struggled to lift something heavy, but he was smiling. I wasn't sure why, but something in that smile was scaring the ever-loving crap out of me.
I don't doubt that Cancri discovered has the ability to do what he claims, to destroy and remake the world, to gain the power of gods, or whatever other nonsense, but I don't want to destroy and remake the world. Not the way he wants to. I'd rather make some more subtle changes. I like this world quite a lot. I like my place inside of it. I just feel like there's certain things that could be done to smooth it over, to make my place more secure.
He gestured with the pistol.
The book provided me with some advice in that department, and once I opened my mind to it, it was like all little doors started unlocking, one after the other.
But the book was destroyed, I retorted. I actually had no clue if it was true or not.
Yes, I know you're bluffing, but even if it's true, it doesn't matter. I've already learned enough that honing my skills will simply be a matter of practice.
You fuck! Vriska yelled. What fucking skills? Threatening women?
Dirk laughed. Hardly. Call it a skill of narrative adjustment. A subtle form of control, but quite effective. It's still a process, but I feel confident I'll get there.
He smiled again, deep and evil.
And now we get to the part where I give you a choice.
He pointed a pistol at each of us, one after the other.
I know what June can do, so here's the two options. Either she can roll back to right before you enter the asylum, and you will all decide not to bother to come in. I will then let you all walk away and go about your lives, provided you leave this general area and never come back.
What's the other choice? I asked. I already knew what the answer to that one. A slug in each of our heads.
Yes, precisely. A slug in each of your heads. Miss Crocker, you are quite sharp. We should have hired you a while ago.
I heard JaneRezi grunt from behind me, shrugging against the orderly's grip.
He's lying about something. He's not going to let us go.
Dirk looked right at her.
Ah, yes, your famous lie-detecting nose. Well, you're partially right. Honestly, I was only going to kill one of you. Does that satisfy your nose for the truth? One or all? Your choice, June.
He looked right at her, then turned.
Jane, this is ridiculous.
JaneRezi continued.
He's acting like June here has made a choice, just looking for a distraction here when all she really needs to do is make a decision and we can go.
That was a real weird way to put it. JaneRezi sounded strange. An idea was forming in my mind, because Dirk Strider was, in fact, a gigantic coward. He was weak and manipulative, and could only get what he wanted using the most underhanded tactics he could imagine. He was weak enough that he thought manipulating a woman like June was
a woman who was more than capable of making up her own mind. Jane was being a foolish piece of shit.
JaneRezi bit the orderly's arm, and he yelped. He didn't release her. But that was never the plan. There were 2 gunshots. I looked down to see nothing. And on the front of Dirk's shirt, 2 red stains were rapidly clouding the fabric. The look on his face was one of complete, utter shock. He looked desperately from me to Vriska, to JaneRezi, to June, the woman they hadn't searched when she came in, because why would they? She was harmless. June was holding a snub-nosed revolver and shaking. The barrel wasn't still smoking. That was a bit of a cliche, but it was definitely still warm. She thumbed the hammer back. Her hands were shaking, but she was gripping the revolver tightly and aiming high. Dirk still had his own pistol, but he could barely lift it now. He stared at June.
Take it back.
His voice was low, gurgling, with his Texas accent creeping back in. June shook her head and pulled the trigger. We finally walked out of the asylum and into that brilliant sunlight of the clear September day. No one bothered to try to stop us. I think they were too busy panicking about Dirk. June had thrown up, because of course she had. I couldn't even begin to explain how bad I felt for the gal. She'd done something unspeakable, because she probably felt like there was no other choice. And in the end, she was probably right about that. I had a strong feeling that the one person Dirk definitely planned to kill was the woman who could roll back everything on him. He seemed to have been aware of that somehow. But in the end, he was still mortal. At least he was when we got to him. Who knew what would have happened if we'd actually walked away from it? I didn't really want to think about it. I had a feeling that we weren't going to be hearing about this asylum at all. I didn't think the local yellow rags would run with the story. I didn't think the coppers were going to come knocking, expecting answers. I had a feeling that Miskatonic buried its own. They would let Porum go, because having her there was a liability, and killing her without Dirk there to fill a vacuum was bad for their health. They needed someone to postpone their own extinction, even if just for a little while. They were bad people, just as much as the folks in New York had been bad people. Maybe in slightly different ways, but bad all the same. There was one thing I knew for absolute certainty. When we got back into Vriska's car and drove back to Boston, I was never going to see this curse-haunted place ever again. And that was something I could definitely live with.
Still good. Okay, I don't know why my chat just cleared, but that's cool. Okay. Chapter 20, Other Ways.
Mr. Empora, I know you've been handling business in New Hampshire for a while now, but I need to call in the favor you owe me. Specifically, I need you to go back to Boston and help Pora Merriam clean house. She'll know what that means. She needs someone who wasn't on the inside when everything went down on this past September. She's been through a lot. She needs someone she can trust. Jane Crocker, PCI. I was right about Porum. She was mysteriously returned to the social club. She was alive, but also deeply traumatized by what she'd experienced and physically exhausted by the ordeal in the hospital. I wrote to Eridan Ampora. He owed me a favor, and asked him to come back. He was, at least, good on his word. Porum was hurt, but she was also resilient. Although she became somewhat more reclusive, I had a feeling this wasn't due entirely to her dealing with trauma. She had rats in her house, and she needed to be careful who she spoke to.
Miss Crocker, this letter is being personally conveyed because I don't trust it to get to you any other way. I don't have the words to thank you for what you did. Dirk was under my nose the whole time, and I trusted him. I believe that he was there to help me, and I was completely wrong. If you hadn't shown up when you did, I don't like to think about what would have happened. I know that none of you are planning to revisit Boston, but if you ever do happen to be in the area, consider the resources of the Boston Council completely at your disposal. I had a lot of work to do here, a lot of investigation and removal of certain elements of the local culture. If you ever find that you do need work, please don't hesitate to reach out. Porum Merriam.
Jane, I appreciate you not trying to talk June and I out of this. While I appreciate the offer to stay in New York, there's too many bad memories for both of us there. I think we're better off making our own way from here on out. I've got plenty of money, and I have contacts where we're going. They say the Alternian community is really growing out west. And I think June was always excited with the prospect of being a cowgirl. That's a joke. June doesn't give a shit about being a cowgirl. She took it hard, what happened to Dirk. I think she understands that there really wasn't any other way for it to go down at that point. She was the one they didn't think would ever kill anyone. I don't quite get what you were saying about what Dirk was doing, but it sounds like he had kind of a blind spot for her. He figured she was only useful for that thing she can apparently do. She's still having nightmares about shooting Dirk, and about the whole changing the past thing. It's hard. It's going to be hard for a while, but we're going to move, and she's already said she doesn't want to turn things back ever again. I think she's scared of all the implications. I'll be there for her. I've got enough to basically retire on. I already sold the houses in Massachusetts. June's going to be okay, and I'm going to help her through this until she can stand up on her own. If you're ever down towards Austin, look us up. Vriska.
I wasn't exactly sure why Vriska and June picked Austin, Texas as their ultimate destination. Vriska knew folks in the troll community down there, sure, but also I think it was the fact that it was far away from where everything had happened. Having some connection down there almost seemed like an afterthought. It was their decision, though, and I wasn't going to begrudge them that. Honestly, I hoped they were both going to be happy. Jane and Terezi, I wanted to thank both of you for what you did. For me. For June and Vriska. For everyone up there. Honestly, probably for everyone in the world. I can't remember what I saw in that book, except that sometimes I can. It terrifies me. Whatever it was that was working through me that night, it's not something I ever want back. It's a part of my past I want to stay buried, all of it. I think that my mother wanted it to stay buried as well. I think she figured out that this was something that no one should ever toy with. Something that no one should have access to. What Cankry and Dirk were planning, nothing good could have come of any of it. I'm glad to have put that part of my past to rest. I know you and Terezi are staying in New York, so please know that Fairy Tale is always open to both of you. If you ever need help chasing down a lead or just want to come hang out and talk for a while. Roxy and Kanaya are being really supportive. Having my big sis and my gal around is making this a lot easier than it would have been by myself. Still, don't be strangers here. Rose. I had a feeling that Rose Lalonde wouldn't be sleeping very well for a while to come. Whether or not she could precisely remember what she'd been through, I'd seen her face in the unnamed village. I'd seen what had happened when the fabric between our reality and the next one got stretched a little too thin. It terrified me. It must have terrified Rose even more. I wasn't the living conduit for something so utterly beyond. That didn't seem like something you could ever really forget.
Jane, I know this is going to sound weird because we don't know each other very well, but could you please call sometime? You or Terezi, actually. Or both of you. I'll send you a letter or a telegram with a number when we're set up in Texas. I'm not sleeping well. Vriska means well, and she's a huge help, but I think she has a different view of things than I do. I love her, but this isn't something she's good at. I'm having a really hard time with the idea that I basically just snuffed out someone's life. No matter how evil Dirk was, no matter what the outcome of his plans would have been, I can't just tell my brain that I did the right thing, because it doesn't work like that. So, if you don't mind, I'd like to talk to you for a while sometime. I don't know why, but I feel like maybe the two of you understand how I'm feeling. Vriska's here to support me, and it would mean a lot if you two could help maybe balance that out a little bit, since we all kind of went through the same thing together. June.
I folded June's letter back into my desk drawer and stuck myself back up into my thick sweater. December had hit with a sudden cold snap that brought the temperature below freezing, and even with the heat on full blast, it wasn't completely taking the edge off. Terezi had snuck up behind me while I was reading and stuck her hands down the top of my sweater. "Oh, geez, your hands are cold," I yelled out, rocking back in my chair. Terezi cackled at me. Some nerve.
Why do you think I put them down there where it's nice and warm?
She leaned over and pushed her hands further down, working around the buttons of the shirt I was wearing underneath. "You stop it. What if a client walks in?" Terezi planted a kiss on my ear and withdrew her hands.
You're the boss, Miss Crocker.
I leaned back and smiled. "Okay, fine. We will close early, and we can continue this discussion back at our apartment."
Oh,
Terezi said, her voice cheerful.
a change of venue. I like it.
She bent over to kiss my neck, then paused.
What's wrong? You smell...
She took a deep breath.
You got a lot on your mind.
I sighed. Just everything that happened back in September. It was a lot. I feel like I had this whole vision of how things were, and then it got torn off. And the weirdest thing is, it just feels kind of normal now. Like I just need to live with whatever the consequences are. Terezi murmured and placed her hands on my shoulders, massaging gently.
You do realize that you're fucking a creature who has literally come from another universe than your own, right?
I blushed deeply. I suppose that yes, I was rather pointedly aware of that fact.
My point,
Terezi continued,
is that what's normal and what's not aren't a light switch. It's something that's flexible and changes all the time. I think you already knew that, though.
Yeah, I said. I'm just worried. And what'll happen to everyone? And what'll happen if there's still members of the Order that agree with Cancri or Dirk?
Then Porum and Eridan, their folks, will run them to the ground and kill them. Besides, I think Dirk was unique. I don't think he had followers so much as people he was manipulating or threatening into doing what he wanted. Now that he's dead, I don't think that'll be as effective a motivational tool as it was.
She was, of course, right. Okay, I suppose I'm just being too gosh darn cautious.
I can understand why the last couple months might have made you a little gun-shy, Janie.
I took a deep breath, held it, let it out. It was whatever it was. Take it one day at a time. I reached up toward Terezi, and she bent over from behind me, leaning down until her soft lips pressed into mine. I opened my mouth a little, and she leaned into the kiss. Her lips were warm, and her tongue tasted faintly of the coffee she'd been drinking earlier. Black coffee wasn't quite as bad a flavor when I was tasting it like this. We broke the kiss after a few seconds, and Terezi stood back up. I had to admit that I did feel a little better. Forget it, I said. It's cold and no one's coming in right now. Let's close up early and go back home. There's stuff I need to do.
I'll bet.
Terezi reached down and playfully ran her hand along my neck, into my sweater, and down my collarbone. I laughed. After everything that had happened, it felt good to laugh. Real life has a way of ending messily. There's always loose ends that don't quite tie up properly, a normal that's always shifting and changing. But there were also a lot of opportunities to grab onto something that made you happy, to have a chance to enjoy yourself a bit in the interim between one serious issue and another. And on that cold December afternoon, I intended to walk back to the apartment I shared with Terezi and fully engage myself in one of those opportunities, for as long as myself and my extremely enthusiastic partner wanted. So, ultimately, maybe not the cleanest end to a case. The big ones almost ended up just as complicated as they started. So not the cleanest by far. But I'd take it.
And that's the end of that story. Bloop. All right. Is my chat box broken? Of course it is. Anyway, so that's the end of that one. I've been reading for 2 hours, so I think I'm going to call it at the end of that one. Next week, I will either read my piece that I wrote for the Lalanzine, or I will read the beginning of the next story. Yeah, of course. Hold on, let me make this big enough so I can actually see that. Yeah, no, I had fun. I like that story. I like the ending of it a lot. Like, I had a lot of fun with the Dirk, like, sort of like becoming his ultimate self in real time, and the fact that that's still like a thing he's not used to, where he's like trying to co-opt the narrative, but he's not quite like good at it yet. And that was a lot of fun to play around with. So yeah, I had fun. I will be reading next Sunday at the same time. Also, for the people that are watching this on YouTube, or the one person who doesn't already know this, maybe, I will be hosting a panel at SawCon, that's the Stuck at Home convention, this coming Saturday, the 25th. Yeah, I think I will read the Lalanzine piece. I really like that, and it's about a perfect length to read in one sitting. So that should be good. Yeah. Anyway, this coming Saturday, I'm not sure of the exact time because the schedule isn't finalized, but it will be in the evening at some point. I will be hosting a panel on this channel on how to write aromantic and asexual characters in fiction with a focus on Homestuck, obviously. So I will be talking a little bit about that and giving some examples from my own work, depending on how much time I have. Should be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to it. So anyone that's listening to this on YouTube, please consider checking that out. That is sahcon.com. The schedule will be posted, I would think, sometime this coming week. It is entirely virtual, and it will be hosted on Discord. And my panel will be hosted on my Twitch channel, but there will be links to that and everything. So cool. Yeah. Again, thank you for listening. Anyone that's watching on YouTube, thank you for checking this out. And I will see y'all hopefully on Saturday and hopefully next Sunday when I read some more of my fan fiction. Thank you very much. Bye.